So after a day of hiking, we made it here to our destination. And it's time to get our camp set up and really change phases from the hiking phase to the camping phase. So this was our first campsite option, but even though it has a spectacular view, a great fire pit, and actually ease to water and all of that, we decided to move on primarily because when you look at the area, there is a ton of rock, and it's kind of a rough area, lots of rocks and roots, and the flat open spots that are conducive to a tent really don't work so great because of the overall rock and root content on the ground. So that's the main reason why we opted to continue to move forward. So with the Crua Duo, I know it's a reasonably large footprint overall. It's not incredibly large, but big enough that it's going to matter. And we had a couple other options for campsite locations that were very rocky, and it wasn't really going to work, but here it's reasonably soft on the ground, which should be pretty nice. Now I do have a little bit of kind of slopiness that I'm trying to contend with, but I think it should work overall pretty well. I mean, we'll end up kind of in this little bowl area, but the good thing is it does kind of pitch away, so if it rains, which it probably will tonight, the good thing is most of the water should slope away from me and not really be a problem. So I'm going to take advantage of this big open area here, clean up some of these rocks and pine needles and all this stuff, and it should give me a good quality area to set up this duo. Now the other thing worth noting is all these trees are alive. I do have what looks to be one standing dead right here, but it's not overly large, and actually we're looking for some firewood, so I'm going to take that down right now, get it out of the way. And then I have a couple of nice sort of trees I can set up a quick little ridge line for, like a clothesline, which will be nice, get my stuff up off the ground. And now in terms of the actual orientation, you can see here my main view of the pond is out that way, so I'm going to set the door and vestibule area facing that way. You know, back here is cool and all, but it's just simply trees, and I kind of want to take advantage of that sort of nice morning waking up and looking at the pond. So this is actually an area we've camped at in the past. It's been great and I do enjoy it. So I'm going to get to work here setting up that duo, and I'll show you the setup once I'm done. So one of the things I consider when I pack up is ease to getting to my shelter system. So here I have my tent on the outside of the bag. The key being, now that I'm trying to set up, I don't need to go digging this out of like inside the rest of the bag, pulling out all the rest of the contents, getting them all dirty and full of like pine needles and sap and stuff like that. And then I actually have my poles and my stakes on the outside of the bag here as well. So the other thing is the actual Crua Duo is quite wide in its standard stuff sack, so I did use a different compression sack here to try to narrow it up. On one of my prior trips, I did have a little bit of an issue with the fact that it stuck out so far. I got it snagged on things, and I typically don't like things that stick out much wider than the actual sort of, call it, footprint of the backpack. So here I kind of use this just to cut down on the overall width of the tent. So now that I have the duo spread out, I'm kind of taking a look at how the footprint lands here and kind of what, you know, where we're going to be laying and what it means about how flat it is. And it has just a little bit of a slope. It's not perfect, but that kind of works. Now, you know, having this kind of mound in the opening is going to be a little bit funny. I'd actually rather it slope away just a touch. So I think I'm better off if I kind of twist this and orient it so that I have more of the vestibule opening more towards this bowl area versus on this mound. So, you know, this is the type of thing you need to think about, just kind of how your opening is going to work, how you're going to be stepping in and out of the tent. And I'd rather kind of step down and out of here and have some ability for the water to sort of drain away from me than for me to be kind of stuffed up on this mound. So I'm just going to twist this a little bit, get it more oriented this way, and that should be pretty good for my setup. So now I'm partway through my setup, and you'll see at this point I pretty much have it staked out in the main corners. Now what I did was actually, before I put the poles in and started popping it up, I actually did stake down the corners just to get it started. Now you can't really do that if you have full tension on it and then pop it up. So you do need to kind of take the stakes out as you get it vertical and then put them back in. But what that did was made sure that I maintained the proper orientation. So here you'll see that once I get this vestibule set up, I aimed it exactly where I wanted that little area. Now another thing that I did was I kind of used my foot and swept out my vestibule area nicely. There is a ton of pitch on the ground here. I did my best to try to clean up the area beneath where the tent's going to be and dig out anything that's going to poke, but now that it's moved around just a touch, I just want to check my perimeter, make sure I get the rest of this stuff cleaned out from underneath it so I'm not jabbing at this all night long. But at this point I'm getting pretty close with my setup, so I'll get my vestibule set up and then finish clipping all the rest of this and getting this thing tied out for the night. So now I have the tent pretty much set up in its final configuration. It's pretty good. I mean, I'm overall happy with it. I got a couple little details like pulling out this vent in the back, and I may or may not use these additional tie outs. I'll probably tie out the back, but the side is sort of provisional in my mind. I don't really need that. Unless it gets really dicey or dodgy and windy, then maybe I'll add those. Now I got the front vestibule taken care of. I'll put these in the back. I got the corner staked down. So in terms of the tent staying put, I feel pretty confident in that. Now, a couple of things that I do try to consider is when I put in my stakes, you know, I do try to put them at an angle towards the tent as I drive them down so that the forces are kind of pulling in it. You know, if you put them straight down, or certainly not in this direction, but, you know, if you put them straight down, these could have a tendency to kind of pull out on you. So I do try to bury them in at an angle. Now, the ground, if you look here, is just a touch spongy, so I got to keep an eye on that. If I had to, you know, I could certainly run additional tie outs to trees or things that are a little more sort of fixed, but the stakes work pretty good for me. Now, one of the things is, you know, when you're not careful, you do end up with area with rock underneath. So there's a rock underneath this one. There's not too much I can do about it. That's pretty much stuck where it's at, but all the other ones were solid. So in that case, I may opt to use this tie out to reinforce this corner, but other than that, I don't see it being too big of a deal. So the other aspect of this is setting up your sleep system, and at this point I do have a little bit of a slope, just a touch, but basically the high end is at what I have right now is the foot end, and then the low end is what I have as the head end. And the main reason why I'm setting it up like this right now, I hope that tonight, if it's comfortable, I can sleep with just the mesh, not enclose this entire thing, get a nice breeze coming through here and just enjoy the outdoor atmosphere. But if it's not comfortable, it's easy enough just to flip around, or if I'm cold, you know, we can close this. So it just gives me options. So it's just something to consider, is kind of, you know, what your intention is and which end your head's going to be at. And, you know, if you have a slope, you kind of got to deal with it. And, you know, this is very, very minor. I mean, I'm talking just a tiny little bit, but at the same time, it's enough to tell. So anyway, I'll adjust as needed, but that's just a little bit of a detail. And you'll see here, everything's nicely staked out. I have the vestibule area completely set up for me to stash my gear tonight. And really, for me, what's key is when I wake up tomorrow, I'm gonna have myself that nice view out towards the pond. So really a cool setup. That's one of the nice things about this tent, is you have this really interesting vestibule area, and if you set it up right, it is a very comfortable night. So then the other thing we considered was the fact that there were 3 of us setting up here, and we wanted to have just enough room. So a couple of things. First is the room to set up. You'll see I have my setup here, and then a couple other guys over here. We pretty much had to pick the flattest spots, and you'll see there's a ton of trees and cover, but there were some pretty good sites here for multiple tents. So we got all 3 set up here, and we're going to turn the corner into our afternoon. So at this point we're all set up and just kind of hanging out and enjoying our time camping.
So after we set up camp, we went for a hike along the pond to go get some water. And the reason why I'm rolling in this footage here is so you can see how many people were on the far end of the pond. Now the reason why I bring this up is because you need to make decisions about where you're going to camp based on what you're trying to achieve. And in our particular case, we wanted some solitude. We wanted to feel as though we were in the outdoors and really enjoy nature. So with that said, we really didn't want to show up to a campsite where there were a ton of people. Now, I did some research and knew that pretty much the far end of the pond was going to have a pretty good amount of people. I had a good suspicion based on the time of year, the season that it was, the weekend that it was, and the exact destination that we were heading towards. So with that said, our decision to stay on the close end of the pond made a lot of sense and ended up being quite enjoyable.
So we're rolling into camp and it's nice and quiet. It's only us, which is why choosing a campsite is extremely important. You know, we had talked about it as a group, and I had a pretty good idea that based on the weekend it is and the location that the other end would be very busy. And it absolutely is. And so to come here to our own nice and quiet campsite is very nice. And the reality of the situation is all the other people who went to the far end of the pond carried their gear in excess of, I would say, 3/4 of a mile, in my opinion, going to the far side there. And, you know, for me to get this nice quiet spot to ourselves, it's 3/4 of a mile there, 3/4 back. So, I mean, 1.5 miles extra lunk in the gear when we get our own quiet spot and everybody else is all lumped up on the other side. So there you go, it's Eric from Outer Limitless bringing you a quick Crewa camp setup. Just getting back from our hike. We've had a full day of adventure, you know, a full day of hiking, which is great. And now we have this beautiful setting to cook some food and chill out, make a fire and relax. So, all right guys, hope you like what you saw. Hope you found it a little bit informative. See you soon.